Hi everybody, welcome to the first week of class. I wanted to check in after having given some of you feedback for your assignments and also having given some of you feedback on your introduction and welcome. So let me say thank you, welcome to the course. I'm excited to get going and somehow also finish the course in 10 weeks. Module 2 is a little bit different. Unlike the first module, this is a 2-week block of time and assignments. The focus of this module is the study of research, the critique of research, and particularly the analysis of research design. These terms might sound confusing to you right now, but I hope we'll be able to flesh them out over the next couple of weeks. In this particular module, you'll be reading some educational research studies so that you can begin to develop a discerning eye and a critical perspective as a reader of research. Let me say that developing these things takes a long time. Don't expect that it will happen overnight. It's likely that you've read research findings before, but it may have been secondary sources, it may have been in different courses, and it may have been commentary or syntheses of original research. We'll be focusing on the original articles themselves. In doing so, a few issues come up. I want to focus on a couple of them here. Validity being the first one. Validity, if you've heard it before, is an indication of how sound a piece of research is and how it applies to the design of that study. It essentially is a measure of how good the design of the study is. And it depends on the type of study, whether we're talking about something that's descriptive, correlational, experimental, qualitative, or ethnographic. These names may mean something to you, they may mean nothing to you, but I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the different types of research we'll be covering this term. Validity specifically means that your findings truly represent the phenomenon you were claiming to measure. For example, if we think about student knowledge and student learning, many of you would probably argue that the tests that you give in class or the national standards tests that students take do not necessarily measure what they claim to measure. They don't necessarily measure student knowledge. There's a lot of hot button issues that are surrounded in issues of validity. This week, you'll read 5 studies, which you can find in the Macmillan book. Free choice learning students can replace 4 of their studies with FCL research, and master's students are welcome to read FCL papers also. You'll use 2 sets of criteria for evaluating the research you read. The first set consists of criteria that reflect the methodological orientation of the research. So this depends on if the research is qualitative. There are evaluation criteria that are related to this type. If it's experimental or action research, then you'll use the criteria germane to that research methodology. The second set includes research of a general nature, some of which you may be more familiar with than in the past. These apply to all research studies, not specifically to a type of methodology. So, Eisenhardt and Howe call these the 5 general standards for validity in educational research. We've rearranged their order according to what is important, though the final standards suggest that all 5 are interrelated. So let me go over these briefly. Again, these are the Eisenhardt and Howe versions. The first is alertness and coherence of prior knowledge. This standard is about the importance of putting any research study you do in context. The data and findings of a study, the research problem, have to be connected to previous or existing literature. That literature connects to a larger body of research and tells you whether the research will have an impact on the field. Does it move the field forward is a good way to look at this criterion. Second, do the research questions, the data collection procedures, and analysis fit together appropriately? Or do they align and do they adequately address the research focus? So if you are reading a study with the following research question that says, how do students come to learn an idea in pre-calculus and calculus? You might expect the data for that study is qualitative in nature, in that you focus one-on-one with students and ask them pointed, deep questions to try and characterize their thinking. You may not rely on quantitative data sets, which may or may not tell you about the development of students' learning over time. The third standard pertains to the effective application of specific data collection and analysis techniques. I realize that's a lot. What this really means is all the researchers want to create a new instrument. There are established principles about how you do that. These principles guide how interviews are conducted, how instruments are created, and how data is appropriately analyzed and claims are made from the findings. The fourth standard, value constraints, discusses two additional types of validity that you'll be learning to apply in the research you'll be reading this term. This is the so what. That is, whether study findings can be used and applied to a particular educational situation. This is external validity. Can you apply this to a particular educational situation? It's validity in terms of the way in which the study was conducted with the research subjects. So, was it conducted ethically, referred to as internal validity? Does the research matter for people outside academy? I noticed in your original descriptions and introductions, many of you were concerned with how this research applies to me as a teacher. And I want to take that to heart. Many times the research articles that you see or may become familiar with are not necessarily focused just on teachers. So we need to do a couple of things in this course. First, try and figure out which articles might be appropriate specifically for instruction, and also try and translate the more complicated articles into tips and best practices. It's a very challenging thing to do. The fifth standard is termed comprehensiveness. This pertains to the idea that the first four standards operate together. So, in reading these 5 standards, I want you to think much more deeply about them. I've given you a brief introduction to them, but as you start digging into these standards, I think it'll help you start to align and think about the research that you read. In the meantime, if you have any questions for us, please let us know, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say in your first, for many of you, your first experience is evaluating educational research.